just as we were talking about climate change in the solar system, we now have a change in this presentation. My microphone started malfunctioning at that point in the talk, and so what we've done is to move this shoot here to Joshua Tree, California, that the solar system would be changing in measurable ways, just as we're now seeing. But more importantly, these prophecies from the early 1950s clearly established that with these changes in the solar system, there would also be changes in human DNA that would literally correspond to an evolution of the human species as we now know it. This is the working nature of the prophecies of ascension, soul transmutation, and so forth that have been going on for so many thousands of years. We now actually have hard evidence from written prophecies that were published in books in the 1950s that you can go find on your own, showing us, in fact, that these climate changes that I've just described are nothing new. They were known about long ago, and it's all part of this spontaneous evolution that humanity is being led through at this time. So if these prophecies from the 1950s actually have a factual basis, then the interplanetary climate change is not simply going to be something that's making planets brighter, hotter, and more magnetic. It's going to be something that actually changes life as well. Now think about what temperature increase really means. If planets are getting hotter, that means the molecules are vibrating faster. That means there's some sort of increase in frequency going on. So if those changes are being caused by an energetic field, and that energetic field is related to consciousness, then would this mean that the planet is experiencing a rise in its consciousness? That is exactly what I'm suggesting. But in order to make that transition into a new model of biology, we have to first re-examine all of the assumptions that we've made about biological life being something that is randomly evolved only on this planet in the typical model put forth by Charles Darwin, hence called the Darwinian model of evolution. I don't like the Darwinian model of evolution because, frankly, it doesn't even work. If you start looking at examples of bacteria that we see right here around us right now, we know that there's bacteria that's been found in ice from the Antarctic, there's bacteria that have been found inside volcanoes, inside nuclear reactors, and even far out in the cold depths of space. Some bacteria from the Antarctic have been revived after being frozen for 10 million years. And as you go even further, you can see that other bacteria down at the bottom of the Black Sea are able to photosynthesize, meaning that they create their own food energy from the sun, even though it's almost pitch black down there. That's a very unusual condition that suggests that they were made to be in that area. How are they able to do that? Others can thrive on nuclear radiation or even infrared light, which is basically just heat. So when you start seeing these bacteria that are inside volcanoes, in sediments miles below the ocean floor, you have to ask yourself the basic question: did they all originate from other living bacteria? Or is the field itself trying to create life wherever and however it can? Are bacteria simply the product of an intelligent energy that is all throughout the cosmos and has decided to make life the way that it is? Could it be that our galaxy has a personality, and the personality of the galaxy has created a template in which all life emerges from an energetic background? If you look at the work of Dr. Chandra Wickrama Singh, he found that the organic material that comes off of comets is biological in nature. In other words, comet dust has bacteria in it. Well, many people don't even know that this has been discovered, and yet it's a common aspect of this type of physics. Since there's billions of comets in the solar system alone, this suggests that life on Earth may have come here from comet dust, or comets that crashed into the Earth. Dr. Wickrama Singh calls this the panspermia theory. But it's not a theory that I particularly agree with because, again, you're basically saying that life on Earth did not come from here, it came from space. Therefore, somehow it would have still had to have evolved in space. You haven't ruled out Darwinian evolution. You still have the potential that life could have been a random mutation. Again, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that life itself evolved from a field, and the field knows what it wants. So when you're dealing with the chicken or the egg paradox, the answer is it's the chicken and it's the egg, because the chicken and the egg exist together as a template in the field, both of which are ready to spontaneously emerge when the time is right. So believe it or not, I first read a book about Dr. Francis Crick's discoveries that DNA was too complex to have evolved randomly when I was in 5th grade. A friend of mine showed me that book that he'd found in the children's section of the library. Now, I find it fascinating that mainstream science and the mainstream media has known about this ever since the early 1980s, which is when I found out about it. And yet, in all that time, we never hear it discussed that the actual founder of DNA himself, one of the two fathers of all the science that led to us discovering that DNA even exists, is on the public record saying that it's way too complex to have evolved by random chance. It's as if the entire Encyclopedia Britannica fell out of the sky one word at a time, and all those words happened to fall in such a way that they arranged together to make every sentence and every paragraph and every page of the entire encyclopedia. So then you have people that say, well, if you're intelligent design supporter, then that means that you only believe in the Bible, that God created the world 7,000 years ago, and that man and dinosaurs, if there were even dinosaurs, would have had to exist on the earth at the same time. Or you're on the side of science and you believe only in Darwinian evolution. Again, the man who discovered DNA is telling us that's not the way it works. He's telling us DNA is so complex that it has to be part of some sort of intelligent design. And the most fascinating discovery he made concerns the actual dust in our galaxy. If you were to simply release bacteria into space, they're going to give off a light signature. It's called a spectrographic signature. Well, he looked at the light signature of the dust that's already there in the galaxy from where we are on Earth to the center. And he found that the dust in the galaxy has the same spectrographic signature as living bacteria. In fact, 99.9% of all the dust in the galaxy has the same signature of light as living bacteria in space. That could mean that everywhere we look throughout the galaxy, we're seeing dust that is actually little critters that are alive. And the reason why is because that's what the galaxy is doing. So if you think about it, this is Howard Hughes' worst nightmare, that space could be filled with germs, as you see in this headline. As you see in this headline from the mainstream media, in this case, UK Daily Mail Online, it says the space dust that created human life has been found in another solar system. So this is another example of how the mainstream media is starting to trickle out this scientific evidence that suggests that bacteria could be just cranking out from the field itself everywhere. In other words, the field takes any given molecules in a certain area and spirals them together to make DNA. DNA is the product of the field. The field literally wants to make DNA because DNA is the wave that is inside energy throughout the entire creation as we know it. One of the ways you can look to see that this might be true is to simply study what happens when you fly things up into outer space and see if there are energetic changes. Well, of course, flying human beings up in outer space, before we get into things like plant seeds, you can look back to testimonies from various astronauts, and they report something called space euphoria, which is that when they go out into space, they have this phenomenal sense of uplifting communion with the universe, a sense of oneness, a sense of stillness, a sense that they are fundamentally unified with everything that there is. And now more recently, the Chinese have done studies where they have flown seeds of various plants up into space and then grown those seeds by a typical hydroponic process when they bring them back down to the Earth. Now granted, this has been done before with experiments from NASA, and they haven't seen anything that unusual. That was one of the complaints that someone gave me when they came up to me at one of my conferences. I would like to point out, though, that the NASA probes are typically made of aluminum, and we know that these torsion fields, as the Russians call them, the energy of consciousness itself, can to a large degree be shielded by aluminum and PVC plastic. So if you have PVC plastic over the windows and an aluminum capsule, then it could be that all these wonderful energetic benefits that happen when you go into outer space did not exist. Anyway, the Chinese must have found a way to build a probe that was not strictly aluminum and PVC plastic, because when they sent seeds up into space, there were some pretty phenomenal changes that resulted. Take a look at this next picture. What you see here is a pumpkin that was grown from a seed that was flown up into space. As you can see, it's absolutely enormous in size. This is not typical. In the next slide here, you see a bitter gao melon, as it's called. This, of course, again, is much, much larger than you would ever normally expect such a melon to be. What you're seeing here is hot peppers, which normally would only be about this long, 2.5 inches long at the most. And yet, when you see the ones that were grown in space, they are enormous in size. Of course, you may also be aware of Findhorn Gardens, which is a particular area in Europe in which the people that cultivate these gardens believe that they are working with the spiritual aspects of nature. And in so doing, they create plants and vegetation that are just as enormous as what you saw in these photographs. Again, the key is harnessing the consciousness field. So when we see that by simply flying seeds into space, that they grow much more substantially, that suggests that the energy that makes things alive is in even greater abundance when we go out into space. That might be why 99.9% of all the dust in the galaxy is fundamentally creating bacteria wherever and however it can. This brings us back to the idea that the source of all life can indeed be found in an energy wave. If you can imagine now a stream going down the side of the mountain, and you see rocks in the stream, ask yourself, how did the rocks get into the stream bed? Did the water naturally appear where rocks already were? Or could it be that when there are large rainstorms and sheets of water falling down the mountain, that they're unearthing rocks that would naturally be there on the mountainside, and the rocks roll in the water current and end up rolling into the bottom of the stream? So that when they get to the stream, it's because there is a pressure that pushed them there. Now think about how this relates to DNA for a minute. Think about the idea that there are molecules sitting around, and that there could be these torsion fields, as the Russians call them, that naturally grab up molecules and will intelligently assemble them into the pattern that the wave already has. We know that the basic spiral of DNA has as its fundamental signature all the basic aspects of the Fibonacci ratio, or what's called the golden mean, which is the ratio of the number 1 to the number 1.618. That growth spiral shows up throughout nature. You can see it in the shape of a nautilus shell. You can see it in the arrangement of a sunflower. You can see it in many of the different patterns and proportions within the human body. This suggests again that the Fibonacci ratio is the fundamental character of the wave, and that DNA is emerging from this wave that exists throughout all of space. Well, this becomes a much more advanced proposition when you look at the work that has been compiled by Dr. James Strick, who wrote a book with the Harvard University Press called Sparks of Life. In the book Sparks of Life, Dr. Strick exposes a major scientific conspiracy that was going on throughout the 19th century, where some scientists were arguing in favor of the Darwinian model, where life evolves through spontaneous random mutation. It just seems to show up on a given planet. You don't know how it got there, it just randomly appears. But remember now, in the 19th century, this conspiracy had not yet been resolved. This was a conspiracy in the sense that the Darwinians ended up smashing down evidence that went against their own model. There were others who were arguing for spontaneous generation, which is the idea that life will spontaneously arise from non-living material. And there were numerous experimental examples of spontaneous generation that were found. These are examples in which you have a hermetically sealed container, and all you have in it is non-living material. There's no way that life could have gotten inside, and yet life spontaneously appears inside this hermetically sealed chamber anyway. with nothing more than water and the most basic ingredients allowing it to come into being. So Louis Pasteur himself had cases where life originated from non-living material. He's the guy who was one of the main architects of this conspiracy because he suppressed his own data and the data of other credible scientists to force fit the Darwinian model into what the data was that we were seeing. So you cannot so easily dismiss this idea of spontaneous generation. There are distinct and real laboratory experiments that show you that this is in fact what was happening. What we've instead had happen is that history has been completely rewritten in favor of the Darwinian model of evolution. And in my opinion, that shouldn't have happened. Well, the best way to see evidence for yourself that this natural, spontaneous emergence of life can exist is in a paper with a very large, tongue-twisting name, Ultrastructural and Light Microscopy Analysis of Sapobians Formation and Growth in Vitro. This was performed by Professor Ignacio Ochoa Pacheco. What is he saying here? Sapa means sand packet, and bions mean light forms, literally life forms that appear initially as light, that emerge spontaneously in a given medium. If you look here, you can see the link on orgone.org where you can look up this study for yourself. In this next slide, what you see is dust and sand that has been sampled from the ocean and put inside a test tube, and then a little bit of surface scum grows on top of the test tube, which is then skimmed off and looked at under a microscope. You don't see anything remarkable in terms of structure in this photograph, because you're literally just seeing little globules that have appeared. The key in Pacheco's experiment was that you had to heat the sand to white-hot luminescence first. Once the sand was heated to a white-hot luminescence, and then you put it into a sterilized test tube with nothing but sterilized distilled water, and you kept a stopper on it, and it was all done inside a vacuum, so there was no possibility of life growing inside. Then what you do is you look at the skin, or what Pacheco calls the surfactant, that grew on top of the water. You skim that off, and you look at it under a microscope, because what you're looking for is to see if in fact little critters grew in a non-living environment. We'll take a look at this next image. What you're seeing here looks almost like a brain. You can clearly see there are two lobes, that they are basically bilaterally symmetrical, meaning that they look the same on both sides, and it clearly appears to be some form of living microorganism. This blows me away even more because what you're seeing clearly looks like a leaf coming from a sea vegetable form of life. You can even zoom in closer to that leaf as we do in this next picture, and now what you're seeing is complex cellular organization within the leaf itself. You can clearly see that this is a biological life form. In this next image, you see what looks like a red blood cell, very obviously biological. And what you see in this next image is something similar to a white blood cell, where it actually has what appears to be a mouth on the front. Clearly a living creature. Now finally, this takes the cake for me. What you're seeing here looks like a little spiny porcupine that floats around in the sea. Those little spines on his body form a defense system so that if somebody else tries to eat him, they can't. And if you look, you can see that he has a little mouth at the front, and that obviously seems to be where his head is. So this is a complex, multicellular organism that has emerged from nothing more than sterilized beach sand and distilled water, allowed to sit there for 5 days, have a little scum grow on top of the water, and analyze it under a microscope. Where did this little guy's DNA come from? How did he emerge in that test tube? Look, all I'm saying is something very simple and straightforward. The DNA that grew inside the nuclear reactor, the DNA that grew inside the volcano, the DNA that grew miles below the ocean floor, the DNA that survived for 10,000 years in a deep freeze inside the Antarctic ice, the DNA that grows in space, the 99.9% of all dust in the galaxy that has the spectrographic signature of bacteria, it all appeared from the field, which then takes the existing material around itself, in this case, the raw materials that you can find in beach sand, and the basic hydrogen and oxygen structure in water, and then intelligently spirals life into being. For me, this is a revolutionary discovery that is further in support of what Dr. Francis Crick was saying, that DNA could not have evolved by random chance. Well, if that hasn't blown you away, check this out. National Geographic published a study on February 15th, 2009, and it absolutely amazed me, because what they showed was the actual proof that identical creatures are appearing at the north and the south poles of our Earth and nowhere else. To be specific, this was called the International Census of Marine Life, and what they found in this census was that there were 235 identical species of creature that were found at the north and the south pole, but nowhere else on Earth. Finding so many species inhabiting both poles startled the scientists, as National Geographic said. Among other species that were found on both poles included whales, worms, and crustaceans. Exactly where these species came from and how they ended up a world apart with comparatively warm oceans in between remains a mystery, the scientists said. And that's a direct quote from the article. So what they don't understand is that the field is creating these life forms. Some scientists actually tried to say that ships may have been taking in ballast, meaning water, to weigh them down at the North Pole, sailing to the South Pole, and then releasing the ballast, and that this is how the creatures went from pole to pole. Well, that was actually examined, and they found that there are no ships that are traveling that way that could account for this. What you're simply seeing is that the Earth has this energetic engine that's cranking out life forms at the poles by the same process, and those life forms only appear there and nowhere else. Well, if you look at this first picture, what you're seeing is called Limacina helicina. This is a creature that only appears at the pole, has a very unique and interesting structure. The bottom of it looks almost like it's a snail shell, but then the top of it appears to be some strange form of jellyfish. This next creature that you see here, again, only appears at the poles, has a very interesting, almost angelic look to it. The next creature here, again, looks like a crustacean, sort of like a shrimp, but you only see this creature appearing at the poles. And lastly, this guy very much looks like a shrimp, except you see he has these two huge arrows at the front of his face, obviously for some sort of defense, to stab other creatures and have his own food supply. What we're seeing here is a really phenomenal effect, because you can look at the work of Pacheco and see little marine organisms growing inside that beach sand that was heated to 1,000 degrees Celsius. But now we look at the Earth itself, and when we look at the poles, we're finding creatures that emerge there but nowhere else. To me, this is a phenomenal proof that what we're dealing with is, in fact, a source field, a life-generating energy field that will naturally take biological material in a given area and arrange it in such a way as to create life forms based on a design template. A design template, by the way, that is intelligently made. Is this solar system change that we're dealing with in some way related to species evolution? Does this solar system change promote species evolution in some way? Could DNA originate and evolve by an outside energy source? We're already seeing the proof lining up for that to be possible. When we look at the study of Dr. John Kearns, we see further evidence that this evolution of species could be energetically promoted. When you take bacteria who are lactose intolerant and you drop them into a lactose-only environment, as Dr. John Kearns did, they do not die off from starvation as you might expect. Instead, they spontaneously evolve new mouth parts that allow them to digest the lactose. This means that a change in the environment actually stimulates evolution. Well, it's obvious that global warming is a change in our environment right now. It's too hot, it's too cold, there's too much water, there's not enough water, and these things keep happening over and over again. So is that change in our environment stimulating us to grow in some way? Well, we just saw now with bacteria that you can drop lactose-intolerant bacteria into lactose, and they spontaneously evolve into something else. We can also see the same effect as you saw with the lactose-intolerant bacteria digesting lactose by spontaneous evolution by looking at the Italian wall lizard. Over a 36-year period, the descendants of these original lizards spontaneously evolved in a very fascinating way. In 1971, 5 adult pairs of Podarcus sicula, or the Italian wall lizard, were moved from their home island in the South Adriatic Sea. Their home island, known as Pod Capisti, was a desert, and they survived by eating small insects. The new island they were moved to, called Pod Mercaru, was a lush vegetative tropical paradise, and the lizards adapted and became vegetarians eating plants. The scientists then returned 36 years later, after 1971 when it first happened, in the summer of 2004, 2005, and 2006. During this time, what they did is to capture the lizards and measure them for various bodily dimensions. This includes the size of the vent on their nose, or the snout vent length as it's called. This includes the dimensions, the size of the head, and of course the mass of their bodies. They took tail clips off of these lizards. They didn't kill them, but they just took clips off of the edge of the tail and tested their DNA just to make sure that these lizards were in fact the descendants of the original 5 adult pairs that were brought there in 1971. And the DNA tests confirmed that they were the same lizards from the source population. Yet the scientists discovered that in only 36 years there were what they called quote-unquote striking differences in the size of the head, the shape of the head. The bite strength had gotten much stronger because it's a lot more difficult to bite through the fibrous material of plants than it is to bite through an insect's body. And they found, most significantly, new structures that had developed inside the digestive tract of these creatures after only 36 years. In fact, these cecal valves, as you see in this image, were never before reported for this species. This is a small pocket inside the digestive system that creates fermentation, which allows these plant matter to be digested properly. So you can see in this next image different types of lizards that are from the same species. And what you can see is noticeable changes in the size of the head. I show you this image just so that you can get a grasp on how big the head could become from a creature that already had a smaller head in the past. Again, this is a spontaneous evolution. It occurs over only 36 years of time, and we're seeing adaptive changes that allowed these insects to be able to eat plants. They also stopped the instinctive behavior of defending their territory. This is very interesting because it suggests that the vegetarian diet helps to reduce aggression. The behavior of the lizards actually changed when they no longer had to kill living things for their food. They stopped being so aggressive. So this is a really phenomenal study for me. You see this little guy and you wonder how in the world simply changing his environment could have made his biological nature change so much. Another example of the same type of effect was found with the humble lizard known as Anolis sagre, or what most of us would call the anole. You can actually buy these little guys as pets in the pet store. Well, what was found in this particular study, which you can see here in this mainstream media link, is that when a predator lizard was introduced to their environment, they first grew longer legs to be able to try to run away from the predator on land. The problem was that no matter how fast they ran, the predator lizard ran faster and still caught them. So then they had to jump up into the trees and run up into the trees where the lizards that were the predators could not go. This was much better equipped for lizards who had shorter limbs, because shorter limbs allow them to climb better, whereas longer limbs allow them to run faster. Sure enough, when they went up into the trees, their limbs spontaneously became shorter in just a very short length of time. The scientists do not understand how this could happen, but it's as if the environment itself stimulated them to change, just like you saw before with the Italian wall lizard. Now in this case, this ugly-looking fish is being called evolution on steroids. It's a monster fish that appeared in a river in the Congo that we've never seen before. And again, scientists are perplexed as to how this fish could have showed up so quickly in the fossil record, because it never existed before and it just emerges. Similar to the way that we're seeing how National Geographic showed 235 different types of life that only exist at the poles. It's showing us that the field is out there and the field is changing and life is changing as a result. In this next mainstream media link, you're seeing that swimming orangutans are now being discovered. The problem is they didn't used to be able to do this. For whatever reason, no orangutan had ever been observed swimming before, and yet now they're not only taking to the water and swimming, they're also learning how to fish with spears, banging fish over the head or stabbing them with the spear and being able to catch that tasty meal as a result. This is new behavior that again suggests that evolution is occurring. So as we ask ourselves a very fundamental question, could a species be energetically transformed? We're now zeroing in on the core question of how this interplanetary climate change that was predicted from these readings in the 1950s, which we'll see a bit later, could indeed lead to biological evolution of you and me on Earth, something that in fact might already be happening right now. We now look at the work of Dr. Tizian Kanchezin, a Chinese scientist whose work has been picked up and analyzed by Russian scientists. What he found was a DNA transformation that was through nothing more than a wave itself. As you see in this diagram, you have number 4 being a duck and number 6 being a chicken. Of course, they're not anatomically correct. It's a very simple diagram. But what you're looking at is that the duck, number 4, is inside a pentagonal room, a 5-sided room. All the number 2s that you see in this diagram represent funnels in which air can pass through and also energy could pass through. Then, after the funnels, you see those orange lines which actually represent copper pipes that go from the funnel to the other room where the pregnant chicken is being held. Now, the pregnant chicken is very important because there's eggs that are developing inside the chicken's womb. What you see with number 3 is a microwave generator. Now, this was not a lethal dose of microwaves. He didn't kill the duck, but he did excite the duck's DNA with microwave energy. Now, what happened was really phenomenal because as the duck's DNA was being excited, those energy patterns went over into the room with the chicken. Now, let's look briefly at this image of a duck. You can see that the duck has a long beak, it has a long neck, it has large internal organs, and if you look down at the feet, you can clearly see that there's webbing between the toes. When we look at this picture of a chicken, you can see the chicken's beak is much shorter, you can see there's no webbing between the toes, and in fact the length of the neck is much shorter. Now, it was a synchronicity. It just so happened that I was looking for these pictures online, and when I found this picture of the chicken, it happened to be a chicken who was raising ducks. Now, of course, when the eggs hatched, they didn't look exactly like ducks, but what they did look like was really phenomenal. As you see in the next picture, there's webbing on the feet, and in fact they were called duck hens. The webbing grew on feet of eggs that were laid from a chicken. Chicken feet don't have webbing. Chicken feet are supposed to have naked toes. And as you look in this next image, you can clearly see that the head of the duck hen looks more like a duck than it does like a chicken. In fact, we have some very specific statistics we can look at here in which 500 eggs were zapped through the chicken. Of those 500 chicken eggs that were zapped, 480 of them actually hatched. 80% of the eggs that hatched had a flat duck-shaped head as they developed. 90% had a shift in the position of the eyes where the eye actually moved back on the skull to the position it normally would be on the head of a duck. And 25% of them actually had webbing that grew between the toes. This is phenomenal because what it shows is that the genetic material of the chicken was spontaneously rewritten inside the womb so that when those eggs laid, they became half duck, half chicken creatures. That completely bypasses traditional Darwinian models of evolution. So you see how it is totally possible to explain evolution that has occurred on the Earth as being existing more primitive species that are energetically rewritten into more complex forms of life later on. Well, we can also look to the work of Dr. Peter Garriev, who took this even a step further. And what he did is to take eggs that had been laid by a frog and then zap them with a laser light that had gone through eggs laid from a salamander. Now, a salamander is considered a more primitive form of life than a frog. One of the unique qualities of a salamander is that you can cut off one of his limbs and the limb will actually regrow. The salamander has the power of regeneration, whereas the frog does not. So in this sense, you could almost say that it dialed the DNA backwards in evolution a bit. Because what happened when you redirect laser light through a salamander's embryos into a frog egg is that the frog egg has a complete metamorphosis, and what comes out is a fully healthy salamander, not a frog. Now, this is a scientific revolution in the making because it suggests that you can have a complete transformation from one species to another within one generation. Your parent could be one creature, you lay the egg develops into a completely different creature, and the only thing that you need to make that transition possible is the actual wave information that rewrites the DNA. It's almost as if DNA is like a jigsaw puzzle that has more than one solution. And this really changes how we see life and how we see evolution. It could very well be the engine of evolution. For if again you look back to the fossil record, as I said before, Dr. James Rope and Dr. David Sepkoski, two paleontologists from the University of Chicago, analyzed marine fossils, over 3,600 different genres of life that emerged in the various layers of fossils from the ocean. What they found over and over again was that there was a 26 million year cycle in the way that life was evolving in the Earth. This 26 million year cycle goes back, as you can see here, some 250 million years into the past, and it includes the fall of the dinosaurs. So how could something like this be possible? How could all creatures on Earth be spontaneously changing in even intervals of time? Well, the scientists really don't know what to make of this. And it got even stranger when there was yet another cycle that was discovered by doctors Robert Mueller and Robert Rode, which in this case is 62 million years long, as you can see in this diagram. And this cycle goes all the way back to the original single-celled organisms found in our fossil record 542 million years ago. In nice, even intervals of 62 million years, the creatures on Earth spontaneously evolve from one form to another. And that, to me, is proof positive that what we're dealing with is galactic energy waves. Galactic energy waves are the only plausible explanation for how you could have even cycles of time. What I'm suggesting is that there are evenly spaced waves of energy in the galaxy, and that those waves of energy are moving away from the center at a nice steady speed. So if they're always the same length and they're moving at a steady speed, that means that the cycles that they will create will be equal in time. And in fact, we can actually look out at the galaxy and see that galactic bioenergy fields may indeed be responsible for causing this 62 million year and 26 million year evolutionary cycle. Now look at this. In this diagram you see the redshift variations in the supercluster of galaxies known as Virgo. What do I mean by redshift variations? Redshift is a microwave frequency that is given off by all objects in the cosmos. Most scientists interpret redshift as being indicative of how far away something is. But Dr. William Tift upended this whole scientific orthodoxy by finding that within a single galaxy, redshift starts changing in even intervals. And those intervals look like layers in an onion, meaning that the highest redshift is at the center of the galaxy, and then in evenly spaced orbits away from the center, the microwave frequencies of light that all the stars are giving off have changes in their frequency that are very measurable. Now, you can see it in this image from the Virgo cluster, and you can also see it in this next image, which is taken from other areas in the Virgo cluster. Dr. Tift's studies have looked at hundreds and hundreds of galaxies. Between him and other graduate students who have investigated this, they have yet to find a single galaxy that does not have these striations within it, where you see varying microwave frequencies. I then direct your attention to the work of Dr. Harold Aspdin, a scientist who on his website, energyscience.co.uk, has fundamentally rewritten the basic laws of electromagnetism by going back to Maxwell's original equations and then extrapolating off of them. He shows you every step. It's straightforward. Any scientist can follow it. What's so interesting is that as he looked at Maxwell's equations, he found that this quantum medium, if you will, the background energy that all matter is made of, would have certain thicknesses, or densities as it also is called. These densities, in turn, can be calculated with equations that Dr. Aspdin has discovered and published freely on his website. You can crank out the microwave frequencies that each density in the quantum medium will give off. That means that even though you can't directly see these energies in the quantum medium, they give off light signatures. They give off microwave signatures. Well, this is what's so fascinating, because when Dr. Aspdin went back and looked at Dr. William Tift's microwave frequencies of redshift that he found in galaxies, those frequencies in the little striations that you see in the galaxy, shaped like an onion, are identical to the variables that Dr. Aspdin's equations cranked out. That means that we have a theoretical foundation that was built first that says that the quantum medium has different levels of density, different planes of existence, if you will, where the basic qualities of matter and energy might even change. And he found that they really do exist in these waves in the galaxy. So we already know that the waves are there. They have been observed in every galaxy that has ever been looked at, well over 200 of them so far. They have been calculated theoretically. We have the equations. And now we're seeing that our solar system is undergoing climate change, and that climate change seems to be due to this expanding ripple of energy that's coming into the solar system. Well, that expanding ripple of energy could be coming from a wave that emanates from the galactic center. Let's look at the work of Dr. Rosine Lallement, because in her work, which you can look up online at the link that you see on this screen, she discovered that the clouds within the local interstellar medium, which is the area of space around the solar system, appear to be flowing towards the solar system from the direction of the galactic center. That means that we actually have proof that these energy fields are emanating from the center of the galaxy, rippling through space, expanding away from the center, and then impinging upon the solar system. You can see that dramatized in this diagram that we have created by computer animation. So let's look at that for just a minute. You see the Milky Way galaxy, and as we zoom in on the Milky Way galaxy, you can watch these ripples expanding away from the center, expanding through the galaxy. And then when they hit our solar system, what do? They charge up the sun. The sun releases energetic particles. Those particles are captured in the atmospheres of the planets. The planets become brighter, they become hotter, they become more magnetic. And in fact, it's also now conclusively stimulating evolution on the planets themselves. When you look again at the 62 million year cycle discovered by Drs. Mueller and Rode, you're seeing the actual signatures of these galactic energy waves rippling through the solar system, colliding with our Earth, and reprogramming the DNA on the Earth. I just showed you in this video how the salamander's egg can be shined through with a laser and redirected into a frog's egg, and the frog's egg then completely metamorphosizes into a salamander. I showed you chicken eggs that were hatched after being zapped with energy from a duck, and they came out as half duck, half chicken. I showed you how lactose-intolerant bacteria would spontaneously evolve a mouth that could digest lactose. I showed you the Italian wall lizard that in the presence of a vegetarian diet completely rewrote his DNA to become vegetarian and to create cecal valves in his digestive tract that allowed him to be able to digest plants. And I showed you a lizard, the anole, that was able to make his legs first longer to run away from a predator and then shorter when he had to run up into the trees. So you're seeing now that life is a field. DNA does not evolve randomly. DNA is an intelligent template, and the template listens to what's going on in nature. The template pays attention to what's happening in its environment, and it makes changes accordingly. But more importantly, what you're now seeing suggests that the galaxy itself has the information that is causing human evolution to be dramatically speeding up. So do we have any evidence that in fact human evolution is dramatically speeding up? We've looked at the fossil record and we've seen examples of other species that can clearly be energetically reprogrammed. We've seen these 62 million year waves of energy coming through. We know that we're at the end of a 62 million year wave of energy right now. We've seen that the galaxy actually does have ripples of redshift, and that Aston's equations show us that those ripples correspond to planes of existence or densities of energy within the quantum medium. So this quantum medium can reprogram DNA. And we have evidence that it's actually happening to our own DNA. We can look and see that human evolution is speeding up. Look no farther than the work of Dr. John Hawkes, an anthropologist from the University of Madison, Wisconsin. He studied rapid evolution, or what's called positive selection, in human beings. And what he found was that in the last 5,000 years, human evolution is now moving 100 times faster. Specifically, as you look to the last 40,000 years, he said that during that time, we have been going through what he called supercharged evolutionary change. The most unusual discovery that John Hawkes came up with is that we are more genetically different from people 5,000 years ago, that means 3000 BC, than they are from the Neanderthals. In other words, if you take someone from 3000 BC, they are more similar to a Neanderthal than they are to us. That completely flies in the face of how most of us think that the human being as it is now is pretty much the same as it's always been, and that nothing much has changed. This mainstream media link from the Daily Galaxy is one of the ones that shows you where this was published, so you can go back and look at it for yourself. And this link comes to you from the BBC News. So clearly this is not being hidden, it's right out there in the open. All I'm doing is taking these various elements and putting them together so you can see how in fact what's happening to the solar system right now is an energetic upgrade caused by these waves of energy from the galaxy rippling through and impacting on our solar system, reprogramming and rewriting DNA as we think of it right now. You can also see what's called the Flynn effect, in which everyone's IQ is increasing by an average of 3 points per decade. This is not unique to any one country. It's been occurring over 20 different countries, and those are only the ones that Dr. Flynn was studying. The change has been going on for more than a century, over 100 years. That means that the IQ test is measuring the average as being a score of 100. A 100 IQ is what the average person is supposed to have. In order to keep the IQ of 100 as an average score, they have to keep reducing everyone's IQ by 3 points. So 10 years from now, your IQ is going to get knocked down another 3 points, another 3 points, and that's because everyone else is getting smarter. So you may also be smarter in the future, but you would test smarter as well. That's the key. The IQ has to be adjusted because human beings keep getting intelligent. This has happened for over a century. 3 IQ points per decade is a phenomenal effect. And what was most interesting was that Flynn discovered that the increase is most striking for tests that measure the ability to recognize abstract, nonverbal patterns. Nonverbal patterns. What does that mean? That means symbolism, creativity, intuition, not literacy. So this is not an effect of people reading more newspapers, going on the internet, reading more books and magazines. This is the result of the spontaneous information that comes in from the field that changes the way that we think, the way that we feel, and changes our minds so that we become more intelligent. This amounts to a cultural renaissance, as Dr. Flynn said, and thus it is something that will fundamentally alter humanity as we now know it. We are in the evolutionary fast lane. In this next study, you can see that 45 out of 52 countries in the world are showing a significant increase in everybody's average happiness. That suggests again that the same energy that creates blissful emotions and blissful consciousness when you go around the standing stones and those ancient sites can be in fact upgrading and activating our own consciousness and our own thought process here and now. We also are seeing within the United States that the gap between the people who are the most happy and the most unhappy is narrowing. That means that everything is normalizing and everyone overall is becoming happier. You're seeing less extremes and everyone is balancing out. And both of these are based on surveys in which people are asked questions and we're able to gauge that their happiness is increasing over time. So, if the Earth's energy has an effect on our consciousness, then what about the galaxy? We've already seen studies earlier in this talk about how the Earth's energy directly affects our consciousness. But now we're seeing waves of energy coming from the galaxy, moving through, impacting the solar system, upgrading DNA, upgrading life. Is there an even more direct way to show that energy fields from the galaxy could be changing our consciousness, changing our minds, changing our perspective? And the answer is absolutely yes. The scientist who came up with this is Dr. James Spottiswoode, who was studying ESP, or what he called anomalous cognition. He did a meta-analysis of all this research. By combining over 20 years of studies into these abilities that people have, these are ordinary people that were documented and done under scientifically stable conditions. Their ESP ability was standardized and put on a certain gradient scale, and what Spottiswoode did was to take all these different studies and meta-analyze them so that everyone in every study is given a universal score of how psychic they were so they could all be compared. No one had ever combined together all these different studies before until Spottiswoode came along. He was the first one to do it. And what he was looking for was to see if people would be more psychic during a certain time of the day. Could it be that when the sun is right over your head during high noon, that your ESP ability would go up? Well, the typical day is called a synodic day, and that is the day that is measured by the Earth moving around the sun. There was no observable time period where people's ESP would increase in a normal synodic day. However, the sidereal day did have an effect. The sidereal day is measured by the Earth's position relative to the center of the galaxy, not relative to the sun. So this is basically our position in the absolute space of the galaxy. He did find an effect. As you look in this graph, what you see here is that at approximately 13 hours and 30 minutes local sidereal time, there is a 400% increase in people's psychic ability. What does that time mean? Well, 0 hours sidereal time is when the center of the galaxy would be at high noon, directly overhead. So what we're seeing is that it's at the exact opposite, meaning that your back on the Earth is facing the center of the galaxy. Now, why would something like this happen? Well, if you take a lens and you hold it up to the sun, you can focus that lens in such a way that the sunlight becomes a point. And if you're a kid, you may have done this where you can burn leaves with that little lens and set them on fire. You don't need a lighter. You don't even need to rub sticks together. You just need a little lens. You could even use eyeglasses. Well, what if the Earth's magnetic field is lensing the energy from the center of the galaxy and focusing it together down into a single concentrated point on the other side? That's the best explanation I've been able to come up with. We don't exactly know how this is working yet. That comes to other scientists after me to discover. But what I am showing you is that no matter how it's being done, it is directly correlated with the galactic center. That can only be explained as if the galactic center is like this jet of energy coming out, shooting energy out through the galaxy, so that when we are in the right position directly opposite it, our psychic ability goes up by 400%. Well, think about the idea that your mind might be an energy field. Think about the idea that if your mind is energetic in nature, if it's an energy field, then when the field starts vibrating faster, the vibration increase means that your consciousness moves faster. Things are moving faster in the field, meaning you can think faster, meaning insight comes to you more rapidly, meaning that your consciousness is changing. So this is the bottom line proof that shows us that this renaissance that we're seeing in our society, where so many people are developing synchronicity, ESP, even the ability to potentially channel other forms of life and give them a voice, is coming about because the galaxy has decided that we would evolve at this time in our life. This is the real working root prophecy. This is what I'm going to be discussing in my book, which is due out hopefully in the spring of 2010, Blueprints for a Golden Age. This is the same material that I'm going to be discussing in my film, Convergence the Movie. It is my sincere hope that you can run with the ball. You will have all the references, all the links, so that you can look at this science yourself, show it to your friends, and bring out conclusive proof, and give them evidence to see beyond what they have always known, to look to the future, to look to a future that is positive for humanity, positive for all of us. I also invite you to come and attend one of my Convergence seminars, because in those seminars, what you've just seen in this video represents only the beginning. I go through a 16-hour lecture with over 800 different slides, and I will show you how all of the things that we've been talking about up till now are then mirrored in prophecies that are given to us from the 1950s. I read you what those prophecies are. You're going to see the prophecies. You're going to understand what they say. You're going to see the Bible in a whole new way. You're going to see biblical prophecies that clearly establish that there is interplanetary climate change, that there is a spontaneous evolution that is likely to result from this. But if you look to the prophecies, if you look to the information, it says that now is the time. Now is the time for you to become something more than you already are. And the idea that you are in fact a spiritual being from beyond the pale of ordinary incarnation, and your body here and your life here is only a reflection. I would like you to think about the idea that you're moving through a hallway of intelligent infinity, that you are walking through the corridors of the divine, that every move that you make, every step that you take in this life is being recorded for infinity. This lifetime that you now have may be the most important lifetime you've ever had in the history of the cosmos, because even if you have karma from other past lives, if you believe that such a thing is true, in this lifetime you have the opportunity to rectify all of that. The point of power is in the present. It's not going to be in guilt over the past. It's not going to be in fear over the future. Are prophecies that involve a golden age. It is only a misinterpretation of Bible prophecy that leads us to think as doom and gloom, that leads us to think that all of these unpleasant things that we're seeing in the solar system are going to lead to massive tidal waves and massive cataclysms. That's a misinterpretation. Most of the prophecies say that we not only survive these changes, we thrive through the changes. The changes are what breaks down the shell that we've built around our heart that has walled away love and walled away peace and walled away the present moment, the ability to focus in the now. If you can just breathe with me right now, take in the living energy that forms your DNA, because your DNA is not randomly evolved. Your DNA exists all around you in space. The energy that makes your DNA can be here now as you breathe with me. As you take in that consciousness, as you understand who you are, the greatest mystery of the universe is identity. Your identity. Because the universe is a product of one consciousness, one energy. That energy has created galaxies. The galaxies seem to have their own personality. The personality of this galaxy is to create human life. Planets are built to have life like us form on them. We are what the universe has created to experience sentient awareness. Our consciousness is the cutting edge in which God, or the Creator, is evolving now. The universe is not a static whole that is waiting for you to catch up to it. The universe, as it says in the Law of One, is in a state of becoming. Your mind, your evolution, your consciousness right now is part of that evolution. The choices that you make, whether you're going to do the easy thing or whether you might do the more difficult thing, could determine so much. In the Law of One series, they say, in forgiveness lies the stoppage of the wheel of karma. What is the wheel of karma? The wheel of karma means that you move from joy to disaster over and over again. When you're at the top of the wheel, everything seems great and everybody seems to love you. But then you fall to the bottom. The wheel goes round and round over and over again. Joy and disaster, joy and disaster. Well, what's really happening here? In forgiveness lies the stoppage of the wheel of karma. In forgiveness is the understanding that there's only one of us here. There is no space, there is no time, there is no past or future, there is only now. And in fact, there is only foreverness, timelessness. The mystery of identity is the greatest mystery of all, because you're now seeing the evidence that the galaxy has programmed us to go through an incremental stage of evolution at this time, a spontaneous shift, almost like a flashbulb going off from a photographer. And after that flashbulb goes off and you open up your eyes and you look around, it's a whole new world. It's a world which, according to prophecies, will have us able to have abilities like levitation, telekinesis, instantaneous healing, thought transference. All of these things that we now think of as impossible, time travel, rewinding and fast-forwarding linear time almost like a videotape. It's nothing that we have to go outside of ourselves to find. And also, so many of you in the past, hopefully this will change now, have sent me emails in which you're expecting me to fulfill this sort of function for you as like a higher self, or as a savior, or a divine enlightened being that you can look up to. I don't want you to look up to me. I don't want you to put me on a pedestal. I have plenty of issues of my own. I have plenty of difficulties that I struggle with. I do have problems. So do you. So does everyone. That's part of the game. The game is that you are confused, and you can embrace the confusion. In fact, in the Law of One it says, it is entirely necessary that an entity consciously realize it does not understand in order to be ready for what is coming. To consciously realize you do not understand is to recognize that confusion is implicit in human incarnation. You can't get away from it. It's who you are. It's what you are. You're not meant to understand everything. This brain, this body that you have, cannot take in the consciousness of the field. It cannot take in the vast intelligence of the cosmos. You only are given a portion of who you really are. So again, I would ask you not to look to me to be that person who, oh, I have to meet you, David, I have to meet you. The person I want you to meet is yourself. I want you to meet your higher self, because your higher self is a part of you that exists outside linear time, millions of years more evolved than you are now. This part of yourself is absolutely wonderful, absolutely joyful, absolutely intelligent. It will never lead you astray. It will never guide you off the path. If you can learn to listen to what it has to say to you, it will only direct you in a way that will advance your evolution. The problem, if you want to call it that, is that sometimes what advances your evolution is very difficult. It's very painful. You can have things happen to you that seem to be disastrous. You can have a car crash. You could have a broken bone in your leg. You could have any number of financial catastrophes. You could have the person you love leave you. Well, here's the trick. If you don't love yourself, the universe does not send people to you who love you. The universe doesn't say, oh, I'm sorry that you're feeling bad. I'm going to send you love so that you'll be much better. No. The way the universe actually functions, which you learn about in sources of philosophy like the Law of One, is that if you don't love yourself, you've now created a field of attraction. And you're attracting to yourself people who don't love you. That's what happens when you don't love yourself. You don't get sent that which you haven't created. You get sent that which you have created. And you attract the like energy that you're putting out there. The universe does that deliberately so that when those unloving people come into your life, you will learn from them. You will learn to say no. This is not the power of now, this is the power of no. And the power of no is what comes to you when you learn to love yourself enough that you're not going to be manipulated. You're not going to be beholden to other people's negativity. When you look at the problems that we have on the earth now with the dreaded Illuminati or the New World Order, they're here by design. They're here because we attracted them here. They're here because they're fulfilling a function that stimulates the evolution of consciousness. Our consciousness is evolving by their presence. They are not simply villains who need to be eliminated. They are fulfilling a valuable function. By enslaving us, by manipulating us, by stealing our money, they are taking the power away from us that we have not acknowledged that we have. With all these technologies that I have showed you, with the limitless energy in the vacuum, we have the potential to eliminate fossil fuel, to eliminate the need to pay for energy. And with the elimination of scarcity comes the elimination of an economic system. It won't happen right away, but we can transition into a system in which there is no need for money at all. A system in which goods and services are provided by robots that we build, the technology that we build, the free energy devices that we build. But the universe cannot allow us to have that technology until we love and respect ourselves enough that we can use it responsibly. There is that contact with your higher self. You can simply breathe in the consciousness of the universe and be one with who you are right now. You can live that consciousness. You can fulfill the promise that, in fact, human becomes godlike. That is the promise that ultimately even is in the Bible. Because in John 14:12, Jesus actually says, "As I do these things," meaning the miracles, "so shall you do them, and greater things, for I go unto my Father." The Father is the field. The Father is the intelligence of the cosmos. When you go unto the Father, when you go into the cosmos, when you tap into the field in the now, in the present moment, you have attained peace. You have transcended the duality of this world that says good and evil, light and darkness. You can see that those people in the past who may have been controlling and manipulating you were only bringing you to a point that you could stand on your own 2 feet, learn to say no without being angry, but by forgiveness. And forgiveness is the stoppage of the wheel of karma. Or as it says in the Course in Miracles, forgiveness collapses time. Time is what it takes to get from where you are now to where you will be when you reunify with yourself as the one infinite creator, as the infinite intelligence this cosmos is built from. You can collapse time in forgiveness. You can forgive everyone who's hurt you. You can forgive yourself for not seeing the truth and the beauty of your own perfection. Once you see that truth and beauty, you'll realize there is only one of us here. And you are the light, you are the love, you are the one infinite creator. This is how it was, how it is right now, and as it always will be. There is nothing else, there is no one else. There's only one of us here. I want to thank you for watching this video, and may peace be with you.